Welcome to another bonus edition of Upon Further Review.
Upon further review.
And in this edition, we'll be talking about the Oakland Raiders at the Seattle Seahawks. You can catch this Week 9 matchup on November 2nd at 4:20 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will be aired on your local CBS affiliates. The Raiders come into this game with a record of 0-7, and the Seahawks are 4-3. The only thing really and these two teams have in common, they both have played 7 games. The Raiders have lost 7 straight. They had their bye week in Week 5, but they lost in New York in Week 1. Then they lost at home against Houston in Week 2. Then they went to New England and lost. Then they hosted the Dolphins in Week 4 and lost. Then after the bye week in Week 5 and Week 6, they hosted the Chargers and lost. Week 7, they hosted the Cardinals and lost. And then last week in Week 8, they went to Cleveland and lost. And now they're going on the road for the second straight week as they go to face the defending Super Bowl champions, the Seattle Seahawks, who started off the season with the first game of the year on Thursday Night Football. They faced Green Bay in Seattle. They beat them pretty bad by 20 points. But then in Week 2, they lost to the Chargers in San Diego. In Week 3, they hosted the Broncos, and they beat them in overtime in the rematch of Super Bowl 48. Then they had their bye week, and they won on Monday Night Football in Week 5 as they went to Washington, and they won that game in a more decisive fashion than the scoreboard would indicate. Then in Week 6, they hosted the Cowboys, and they lost by a touchdown. And then they went to St. Louis in Week 7, and they lost to their division rivals, the Rams, by just 2 points on a controversial call at the end of the game. There was also a big 90-yard punt return in that game as well. But in Week 8, they put an end to their 2-game losing streak, and they beat the Carolina Panthers in Carolina. A very impressive road victory. It was all about defense, as their defense shut down the Panthers and only allowed 9 points. And now they're back home to face the Raiders. And the Raiders have some injuries. They're out without Osbury, Brown, Chikwa, and McGill are all out. And Carlos Rogers probably is not going to be playing. But with the Seahawks, they've got a ton of injuries. Jordan Hill, Dron Johnson, Byron Maxwell, Malcolm Smith, Zachary Miller, Bobby Wagner, all those guys are out. Then they got a bunch more guys that didn't practice. Cam Chancellor, Russell Kong, Steven Schilling, they all didn't practice. Unger was limited in practice. Some other guys that are injured also as well, including even Sherman, but he was full participant in practice, so he should be there. But that's the one possibility the Raiders have, is how banged up the Seahawks are. But even still, I'm going with the Seahawks. And let's look inside the numbers for these two teams. The Raiders are 21st in offensive passing yards per game, and the Seahawks are 29th. When it comes to passing defense, the Raiders are 13th, and the Seahawks are 10th. So when it comes to passing the ball, the numbers favor the Raiders, actually, to tell you the truth. The Seahawks have a better pass defense, but the Raiders, the strength of their team is their pass defense. And Derek Carr's been putting up some numbers, and they actually throw for more yards than the Seahawks. But I think that's kind of deceptive. They run the ball so much in Seattle. Marshawn Lynch is having a good year. Russell Wilson, we saw a couple weeks ago, he threw for like 313, I think it was. So he seemed to kind of come alive in that game, and that was against St. Louis. Of course, last week he didn't hit 200, as he's 3 times failed to reach 200 yards this season. But against the Raiders, he should have an alright day. Maybe not a huge day, but he should put up enough numbers. But still, technically on paper, the Raiders do have a better passing game. It's just the numbers. Then we look at the running offense of both teams, and the Raiders are dead last. They are 32nd in running the ball in yards per game. The Seahawks are number 2 in the NFL in running the ball. When it comes to run defense, the Raiders are 26th and the Seahawks are 6th. So the clear advantage goes to Seattle when it comes to running the ball. Marshawn Lynch is having a big season. I know that there is, talk about locker room issues, but that's a lot of, hype. So, they're getting it done on the ground. The numbers don't lie there. And the Raiders, they cannot run the ball to save their life. So it's going to be all Seattle on the ground, and they definitely have that advantage. And their defense stuffs the run. The Raiders can't stop the run, so look for the Seahawks to have a big ground game and a big game on the ground. But when it comes to points for and against, the Raiders are 31st in points scored. The Seahawks are 13th. And when it comes to points allowed, the Raiders are 24th and the Seahawks are 10th. So the Seahawks have the clear advantage there. The Raiders struggle to put points on the board, and they're not very good at stopping teams either. The Seahawks, they can put points on the board. That number should be increasing as the year goes on. And the same with, them keeping teams out of the end zone. They're in the top 10. And that should actually improve, especially after this game. Watch, they'll be maybe in the top 5. They might even get a shutout. Who knows? Even though Derek Carr should have a decent game. But overall, the numbers are in favor of Seattle. And even though the passing technically is, in the advantage of the Raiders, don't be surprised to see Russell Wilson, having a pretty good game. I think maybe 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 on the ground, maybe even runs for 100. Very possible. Maybe even runs for 200. Maybe Russell Wilson gets 200 yards passing, 200 yards rushing. That could happen. Would not be surprised. So that's what I think. I think Seattle's going to win this game. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Very interested to read your thoughts and opinions. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to hit the like button. And if you want more content like this, go ahead and subscribe. We bring you upon further reviews and recaps for each and every single game, each and every single week throughout the NFL season, all the way through the playoffs. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and have a great weekend and enjoy all of the sports.